Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about the large number of civil lawsuits against Trump for his January 6th related conduct, which at least as of now continue to be green lighted, likely will be fights he has to take on even though he is president, and could really complicate his life, both financially. Some of them concern a lot of money, and all indications are he's never had the kind of cash he's claimed, and just might be proxy for what had been the hope of people that the January 6th criminal prosecution by Jack Smith would go forward and reach some kind of judgment that the people would credit as to Trump's culpability, both legally but more generally, just in the real world, for having put into motion some terrible forces that sought basically to defeat the democratic peaceful transfer of rule. Okay, so I wanted to basically lay out the civil landscape here. There are 8 cases that were brought by victims of January 6th itself. You know, often these cases have a little challenge. What's the standing here? You object to what happened, but how were you hurt? Not so for Eric Swalwell. Not so for some of the police officers. Not so for others who brought lawsuits along with Swalwell. These goons came in and beat them up, or caused them to cower, or did things that were obvious injuries, and that gives them the basis. Remember, standing, it's a very inflexible doctrine to qualify under, but then things really open up. So you can have a smallish injury, and I'm not saying these are smallish. People had their heads beat. But once you have it, now you can challenge so much of what Trump did. So the basic pattern of these 8 civil lawsuits, which now have been consolidated, so they're being tried in one action because they have so much overlapping facts and law. That action is in front of a pretty well-respected judge on the D.C. District Court, trial court level, whose name is Judge Amit Mehta. He has those 8 cases, but they're basically saying, Trump, you did these things, then you're legally responsible for the injuries I got. So they'll concern many of the same issues in discovery, fact issues, which the plaintiffs will have to prove to win their case by a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. So we'll have the same discovery and the same requirements for Donald Trump to produce information, maybe be deposed. He'll fight it tooth and nail at every stage. But the basic idea for these civil lawsuits is that the principle, very broad principle, very, I think, wrong principle of immunity that the Supreme Court imposed in a criminal case doesn't apply here. First, the notion that, which the famous OLC memo propounded, that it's just too much of a distraction and a kind of, you can't have that sort of sword over a sitting president's head. The Supreme Court has expressly and unanimously rejected that idea where civil lawsuits are concerned. And when Paula Jones brought a federal civil rights action against Bill Clinton for allegedly a sexual assault many years before, the Supreme Court said, no, that can go ahead. It's not so terrible. Your lawyers handle it. It's a civil case. It's just about money. Maybe you sit for a deposition. It's all fine. So that's the general principle that, there's no kind of inability or incapacity for no constitutional offense, you could say, at the president's having to sit for this. And then second, the D.C. Circuit has held in a case that Trump, I think, will try all he can to reverse, but the Blasingame case, that there's no immunity for the actual conduct, and there they have drawn a line that's familiar to us from the criminal context, basically saying if he acted in an unofficial capacity, he doesn't have immunity, therefore he is on the hook. And here, January 6th, the court held he's acting like a presidential candidate, not like president. Presidential candidate is not an official officer of the United States, and in allegedly working up the crowd, getting them to try to storm the Capitol, change the election. That's something that not a president, but a presidential candidate does. Therefore, no immunity. Therefore, you got to face the music, go through discovery, jury trial, everything. This could be really pretty big if the Supreme Court doesn't reach down and somehow try to disrupt it. So those are the sort of core civil cases that in certain important ways and a lesser burden of proof replicate the allegations that Jack Smith had taken on himself to try to prove as part of the criminal January 6th case. That's not all there is on the civil docket for Donald Trump to lose sleep over. There are two big cases that have been, so the 8 cases, by the way, they've just been kind of percolating going forward. Will Trump, his big roll of the dice at trying to get immunity there, even though we have the DC Circuit opinion. But then we're just moving to trial, maybe in about a year or so. And, I've given you my thoughts for why the trial will be high stakes for politically and maybe financially. Okay, but speaking of high stakes financially, there are 2 civil suits that are really pretty significant. There's the one brought by the New York Attorney General, and that had to do with the Trump and Trump Organization regular MO of messing with valuations of properties, making it look high where it's convenient to look high, low where it's convenient to look low, getting as a result favorable loans from banks for suggesting that his values were more, which is what you have to put up in case you default, were more valuable. He's fighting that still and basically saying what he said all the way through. They got paid back, so what's the problem? But the problem is under New York law, it doesn't matter if you get paid back. You can't file these fraudulent documents, which he has filed. And there's interest accruing now. I would not be surprised to see the appeals court, the appellate division in New York, reduce the award from its, pushing $500 million, but they could cut it in half and it would still be a pretty big check that he would have to write. From there, of course, he'll try to go to the New York highest court, the Court of Appeals, and then potentially, if he can gin up a federal issue, because the Supreme Court doesn't deal with state law issues, to the Supreme Court, where his friends might, he hopes, be at the ready to cut the knees out from under the New York case. And then second are the defamation cases against E. Jean Carroll, which right now, especially given how he has reacted, have a price tag of about $100 million. He continues to defame her, by the way, and she's decided life is too short to keep suing him over it, but she has a couple judgments, and there's no obvious way to overturn those that I see. And if that keeps going, that's $1 million check that honestly he eventually has to write. So there's the whole civil landscape. We've kind of been assuming, he's off the hook criminally, so everything's fine. But it ain't so. He's got, big checks to write, and also cases. The Eugene Carroll case, where remember she alleged and proved that he assaulted her in a totally jerky, nasty, oppressive, predatory way in the changing room at Bergdorf Goodman. And then, of course, these other 8 states all bring up the January 6th conduct that Trump is so eager to basically erase from the pages of history, and somehow thinks that his election represents a popular sentiment in that direction, and somehow thinks that popular sentiment can control what the pages of history say actually happened January 6th. If that's true, we are in a world of hurt in a basic authoritarian government where the government gets to actually detail history and the facts, very much the government that George Orwell cited in the famous authoritarian government novel, 1984. And we have many steps of decline away from democratic rule between there and here. And it's just going to be everyone's job, I think. And I'll do my part certainly to keep those steps from happening and to keep the judgment of history and at least the civil rules of accountability still applicable to Donald Trump and his anti-constitutional and pernicious conduct of January 6, 2021. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.